Hi, everyone. We are Cranla and Peter, and welcome to Being More Human, the Conversations. I'm Cranla Warren. I'm an organizational psychologist. I specialize in leadership development and emotional intelligence, along with culture in organizations and helping cultures to live a values-based existence. I'm also a social worker with a commitment to mental health, and I'm also a coach. I've been described as a people archaeologist, and what that means is that I'm able to see the gems and the jewels in people, and I help to extract them and dust them off and polish them up and help people to let them shine.
Hi, folks. I'm Peter, and I am a licensed master social worker. My practice is trauma informed. So everything I do from a human behavior perspective looks at not just human behavior, but how are we responding to situations based on trauma theory. I'm a facilitator and coach for leadership and executive development. I specialize in organizational culture, maintaining and building a positive one, and I'm a connector of dots. I like to see the hidden connections that others don't and help them find those hidden connections to move forward, whatever forward means to them.
So Peter and I have stayed connected throughout this pandemic, and each of our conversations has been richer than the previous. And so we thought we'd share some of our musings, some of our insights with all of you in our interest of being of service. Being human is a given, and holding on to our humanity is a choice. And that really is the foundation of where we're coming from with these talk segments. On these segments, we will be emotionally honest and say what typically may be left unsaid. And we're also going to aim to shine a light on things that may feel a little bit blurry or even out of touch or out of reach. We'll normalize what needs to be normalized and share through a lens of empathy and new perspectives that may challenge you to take even one step forward in a helpful direction. Today, we're going to talk about the current reality we've all been living in and schooling in and working in and navigating, the 2020 to 2021 pandemic. Peter, when we've talked about the current state we're in right now, you've described it as a massive global trauma. So let's start there.
So, hey, folks. We're painting a picture of a crisis right now. We're trying to give you a framework to understand, what Cranla and I have been talking about and why we feel like others might appreciate some of the ideas that have been coming up for us. And so we are in a massive global trauma. And what that means, trauma at its most basic is when too much happens too quickly for us to be able to integrate it into our understanding, into our bodies, into our emotions, and we respond according to that. And so we've all been experiencing this together over the last year plus as we've navigated this pandemic that just jumped out at us. And so how does that show up? Trauma responses could be anywhere from a freeze response, where you just sort of shut down. It might be an anger response, additional anxiety, a desire to get things done off that checklist that you've got. So you might be feeling something and you're kind of like, where did this come from? Well, I'll tell you where it came from. It came from the fact that we're all experiencing this trauma where too much happened too quickly for us to be able to integrate it into ourselves. So, Cranla, how does that feel for you as I say that?
Well, I'm really in touch with this whole collective trauma experience to a certain degree because we've all been living in it.
Yep.
And for me, it's also this collective loss of normalcy.
Right.
I think, when we look at the global efforts to prevent the spread of COVID-19, it's really affected people in many, many different ways. People have lost jobs, working from home, or they may still be working and be reduced in pay. And this can cause a financial strain in many cases. Children, I think, have really been impacted in this past year. Certainly where I live in Ontario, Canada, where schools are closed and parents are having to school their children at home. So it's often meaning that one parent has to give up their job to take care of and homeschool the children, while the other one is bearing the brunt and the weight of being the sole breadwinner. So there's a lot of, when you talk about trauma, I'm really sitting in and feeling the impact of that. And I think, one of the things you and I have talked about was even the way we shop or celebrate special events, or the way that we entertain or have entertained ourselves is really, really different. And I know, talking about shopping, you were once sharing with me a story about going to Target, and I was like, what? You can still go into a store? Here in Ontario, Canada, we're on a stay-at-home order. We're on a lockdown shutdown. We can only leave our houses to go to the grocery store, medical appointments, the pharmacy, or to a gas station. So the thought of going out to a department store right now is just, it sounds completely crazy to me. What a wild idea, because it's not within my grasp.
Yeah, folks, if you're watching this, Cranla and I are sitting here. We've been talking every week. We're connecting, we're supporting one another, and we're in very different situations. I'm able to go to Target. We were talking about my loss of joy at grabbing a coffee and wandering around Target anytime I wanted. And that was just my few moments away. And now you can't really do that anymore. I'm also vaccinated. I've gotten both of my shots. And Cranla's here. We're both in developed nations. We're both in first world countries. And, Cranla's sitting here under a stay-at-home order, and the province is having a hard time getting vaccinations out to eligible populations. So she and I are in very different places right now.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of the meme that says we're all in the same boat. Some of us are in yachts. Some of us are in rowboats. Some of us are on a stand-up paddleboard. And some of us actually are out of the boat now, and we're just treading water, trying to keep our heads above the surface. And so we're all experiencing this collective trauma in many, many different ways.
Yeah. And you've talked a little bit about loss. And so how is, I talk about loss in respect to it. I've lost so many of my routines, my ability to just sort of randomly decide I want to get out of the house. I'm going to go to Target, grab a cup of coffee and wander around, or my morning gym routine, or, so many other of those. And you've talked about that, but, you've also talked about some pretty personal losses in relation to your grandchild.
Yes, it's been, the beginning of the pandemic, we were all locked down together. And so my husband and I were able to see him every day and watch him grow. And there was so much joy in that. And then halfway through the pandemic, that little family moved off into their own home, and they're locked down in a different city. So we're not able to be physically together. We have to socially distance in our own households. So our only contact is via Zoom. And it really is disheartening to not be able to be there and see him grow up in the way that we have. And I know that there's so many different levels of loss, so many different levels of experience of trauma. This may feel like a small experience of loss and trauma, where some people have experienced huge losses, the loss of a loved one, maybe even due to COVID. And there's been major psychological and mental and emotional impact. And people in so many cases are feeling, deep, deep loss of control.
Yeah.
I can't leave my house without one of those reasons. And there was a time when the police could stop me and ask me where I was going. They've disbanded that now, but talk about a loss of freedom and a loss of control, a loss of a sense of safety and security. I think that even going out to the grocery store and wearing a mask, not everybody wears their mask in the same way. Is that even really protective? So I think loss, and you've talked about loss of routines, loss of rituals. So there's this deep, deep sense of loss. Loss then turns into grieving.
Yeah.
And mourning. And I think a lot of people may be experiencing that right now. And as human beings, this is about being more human, these conversations. And as human beings, the experience of loss is just one of the hardest things we face.
And as you're saying that, I want to look straight out into the folks who might be watching this and say, if you're sitting there and thinking about your own losses, and you're saying, well, my losses aren't that bad, I don't have any right to grieve them. Wrong. Loss is loss is loss. And if it's important to you, it's important to acknowledge it. It's important to acknowledge whatever that loss is. It's important to name that loss. And it's important to grieve that loss because they're all valid losses. Each of us lost something. And it doesn't matter the gravity of it, it's still personal. And it still means something to each of us inside.
I think, I look back over the past year, and there are points in time that feel like a blur because there's been constant change. Times we can be together, times that we can't.
Right.
Now we're back together, now we can't. The rules are changing, and it's really hard to keep up. And I was telling you a story the other day about how one day there was snow on the ground because I think it was like 32 degrees Fahrenheit, 0 degrees Celsius. And then the next day, it was like 68 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 20 degrees Celsius here. And things just changed overnight, 24 hours, completely different. So we're always shifting and pivoting and recalibrating just long enough until we have to navigate the next disruption. And it's exhausting.
It is.
And people are experiencing unprecedented levels of stress. I've even heard it called toxic stress because it's been ongoing on and on and on for over a year now. And this leads to anxiety, leads to depression. Our numbers right now in North America for people who are experiencing new cases of anxiety, depression are over 50%. Half the North American population are feeling extremely anxious and feeling depressed.
And
so when you
No, and I just want to say, if you're watching this and you're feeling this way, you're feeling this depression, you're feeling this anxiety, I want to validate that. I want to normalize it. This is okay. We should be feeling this way. Again, this was a massive worldwide trauma that just hit us all out of nowhere. And we look at, and oftentimes I find myself, are we still doing this? Is this still happening? Or we still, because we've been in it for so long now. And it's like, well, I should be over. No, this is just, it's compounding. As you put it, Cranla, it's this whole idea of trying to adjust to new rules, new restrictions, new this, new that, the change in the weather. There's a lot going on. And so if you're feeling that depression, if you're feeling that anxiety, number one, I'd encourage you to find a professional to help out with that, because that is so important. Cranla and I are both professional mental health practitioners. And I can't tell you, it's just so important to find a good practitioner to help you work through that. But also, I want to validate that it is completely normal that you should be going through this at this time.
And these emotions are really, it's a whole language internal to us as human beings that are telling us that something's going on that we need to pay attention to. It's preparing us for the changes that are coming. So let's not just sit and rationalize it away. We have to pay attention. So I agree, Peter, if someone's feeling this to an extreme degree and they're struggling, please don't be sitting on your own with this. Reach out and get help.
Yeah.
I think also, I look at my situation and talking about my grandson. One of the things that I've been doing is really following, Peter, what you and I have learned. So the first thing is I've made a list of what are the 3 issues right now that are really causing me to feel some sort of way, and I've put those 3 issues down. I've named them. So the first thing we need to do is put it down, name it, call it out, look at it. Because yes, we're talking about normalizing. Everybody's going to have their list of 3 things. They won't all be the same, but people are going to have at least 3 things that they're struggling with right now. And when you're looking at those 3 things, take the time to look at how are you feeling about those particular situations that you're struggling with. I miss my grandson terribly, and I'm feeling really sad about that. And that's okay. And once I acknowledge it, there is a release that happens for us mentally, emotionally, and physiologically once we recognize and name what we're feeling. So let's not just try to suppress or rationalize it away.
And once it's out of there, onto a piece of paper, it now becomes an external thing. And you can have a different relationship with that external thing. It's an opportunity to name what's happening to you, put it down on a piece of paper, because when we put it down on a piece of paper, we're going to have a greater relationship with it. And to normalize, acknowledge, and be kind to ourselves. So as we're having these feelings, it's important to just be kind to ourselves.
And the process for me, it really does, we've talked about how emotion is energy in motion. And so naming it, calling it out, processing our emotions, it relieves a little bit of the pressure cooker, which is bubbling for all of us right now. Whatever might be in that pot that's bubbling, we all have something that's going on. So it's a small process, a little bit of a best practice to share. It helps us to relieve some of that energy, and it's all part of creating a good foundation for mental health, healthy mental health and emotional health.
And folks, we're going to put some resources into the below. So wherever you're watching this, whether this is on LinkedIn or YouTube or some other platform, we want to encourage you to share with us in the comments. How are you feeling? And how is that showing up for you from an experience perspective? Share with us what you're doing about that. Are you journaling? Are you writing it on scraps of paper like I do? Or do you have something else that works for you to acknowledge, name, and be kind around your feelings? So share that with us in the comments. We're going to give you some resources. And folks, this is Peter and Cranla, Becoming More Human, the Conversations.